Alien conspiracy and abductions aren't anything new, but with the government openly admitting to having divisions that investigate UFO, or as they're referred to now, UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, it's a great time to look at the purported true story of Travis Walton and his buddies, who in 1975 came across a UFO and Travis was allegedly taken for 5 days. The book The Walton Experience was released in the late 70s, and it took until 1993, the same year the X-Files premiered, for the film adaptation Fire in the Sky to be released. The movie received mostly good reviews, but only made $19 million on its $4 million budget, while eventually earning a cult following. While it's pure science fiction in nature, it has a tinge of horror to it, one scene in particular. How does the movie fare with Walton's own account of his harrowing event? Watch the skies as we probe and find out what the fuck really happened to this horror movie. Travis Walton was eventually able to get his book made into a movie and decided to release the book with the name of the upcoming film to tie it in better. The chosen director, Robert Lieberman, had only done TV up to this point, and when given the chance, spoke with writer Tracy Torme on how best to approach the story. While Torme had gotten his start as a writer on SNL of all things, he's also written for things like sci-fi TV epic Star Trek The Next Generation, and a few UFO-based properties like the TV documentary UFO Cover-Up and the Richard Crenna TV series Intruder, which was also about alien abduction. Probably the coolest notch on his belt is being the creator of the TV show Sliders. For the record, neither of them thought Walton was telling the truth, with Lieberman stating that he thought Walton was smarter than his friends, and the group almost certainly got carried away after lacing their own beers one night. The movie would have a 90s all-star cast, with the post-Terminator 2 and pre-X-Files Robert Patrick, E.T.'s own Henry Thomas, future big-time director Peter Berge, Nightbreed's Craig Sheffer, and D.B. Sweeney as the main character Travis. D.B. Sweeney wasn't the director's first choice to play Travis, but he was told with so little time until filming that it was either Sweeney or the movie wasn't happening. In addition to the main cast, you had character actor great Noble Willingham as the small town of Snowflake, Arizona's sheriff, and Oscar-nominated Hollywood old-timer James Garner as the special investigator Lieutenant Walters. The cast blends together well, with Patrick and Sweeney having great chemistry as best friends, while Garner is a standout who never believes the alien abduction story, and even considers it a murder case before Walton shows up 5 days after. But how well did the behind-the-scenes team, a team that didn't believe the story was true at all, do in having the film follow the quote-unquote real Travis account? The movie opens up with what we'd assume is some sort of extraterrestrial light shining down a highway that actually turns out to be a truck speeding its way towards a bar. It almost causes an accident with a semi-truck before parking and having 5 men enter the bar in a stunned silence until agreeing to stick to the story and call the cops. The local police arrive with a special investigator played by James Garner. Walters begins to question them as to what happened to their friend Travis. Well, right off the bat, we can see the creative liberties the screenwriter and director took to make the story their own. In addition to there being 7 men in the real-life story, including Travis, as opposed to the 6 total depicted in the film, the men went looking for Travis after the supposed abduction first, but in the film, it's just Walton's best friend, Mike, played by Robert Patrick, who goes back to look. The men then go on to tell the story of the abduction, with all of them working a long day to finish a job so they can get paid, and when they leave that night, they see what they assume is the lights of a downed airplane. The plane turns out to be a UFO, with Travis getting out and going to investigate. He's entranced by a light coming from the ship, and the rest of the men get scared and leave. Walters doesn't believe the story at all, and pressures them into admitting a murder happened before they all agree to go looking for Travis the next morning. They don't find any traces of Travis or the UFO, but hold steadfast in their story that it was a UFO and not a murder. Well, the men have mostly different names and personalities, but this is how the events transpired. There's also no special lieutenant that came to investigate either. It was just the sheriff and the sheriff's deputy that took the men's statements and then gathered a search party to go look for the missing Travis. A member of AFAR, or the American Foundation for Aerial Research, approaches Mike to discuss the abduction, and the town begins to gossip and turn on the group of men. The men also turn on each other a little bit as tensions rise when Travis still doesn't turn up. Travis's brother-in-law threatens to hold Mike and his crew personally responsible, and most of the town agrees with Walters that the men murdered Travis, especially since one of them, Dallas, was hostile towards him at points and has a criminal record. Mike defends himself and the rest of the crew in front of the whole town during a meeting and openly agrees that they will all take a polygraph test to prove they're telling the truth. Well, the book is told from Travis's perspective, so much of the comings and goings in the small town were made for the screen to create more drama for the audience to hold on to. The near fight in the restaurant and the drama between the crew were set up by the writer, who was a good creator of human drama within their sci-fi shows, and that helped shape the rest of the narrative more than just what the book was about, especially with the writer not really believing Walton in the first place. The men all take the lie detector test after a conversation that they have with worries of being set up to fail before the sheriff assures them that the man administering the test can be trusted. The tests come back inconclusive, and the men are all told that they have to come back to retake them the following day, but refuse, as they did what they were told to do to get the pressure and assumptions off of them. Later that same night, Mike receives a phone call from someone claiming to be Travis, and they want to be picked up. Mike and many of the friends and family drive down to the gas station payphone where the call was made to find a very disoriented but alive Travis naked and cowering in a corner. They get some clothes on him, and he's a bit bruised but seems okay while downing as much water as humanly possible. The man from afar bursts in to get the story and pictures, but they end up taking Travis to the hospital instead. In reality, lie detector tests were indeed administered, but they all passed except for Dallas, who just refused to take the test, all due to his criminal record. They weren't asked to take the tests again, and the sheriff decided that then and there, the men must be telling the truth, and the abduction was deemed real. Travis did in fact call from a payphone for help, but instead of phoning his best friend Mike, he instead called his brother-in-law to say he needed help and to come get him. Both of these were almost certainly changed because they wanted to give the Walters character reason to not trust Dallas with his inconclusive test, and because Mike was a much bigger focal point in the film than the brother-in-law was. They immediately take Travis to the hospital, where he goes in and out of consciousness and sees glimpses of his ordeal on the spaceship. He isn't speaking to anyone and is clearly trying to piece together what happened when he finds out from Mike that he and the logging crew left him to die that night. Walters confronts Travis about what happened, but Travis simply tells him that he can't remember, and he's still very confused by everything that's been going on. Back at a homecoming party, Travis passes out and begins to remember everything that happened after the light from the ship. The real-life Travis wasn't taken to the hospital right away, and authorities weren't immediately notified, which spurred more voices to believe that it was a hoax. Also, Travis would tell anyone and everyone who would listen to him on what he claimed happened that night, rather than holding it in and being introspective. Travis's brother Dwayne called a UFOologist that he remembered told him that when Travis returned he would set up a medical exam, but they later found out it was not going to be with a doctor, but with a hypnotherapist. They refused, and the UFOologist became one of the many to refute Travis's claim. The movie then shows us what we've all been waiting for, with the big spectacle done up by ILM where we see what Travis went through. He wakes up with a liquid running into his mouth while he is trapped in some sort of organic encasement with what looks like turkey stuffing on the ground. He's able to claw his way out, only to find himself in a large cylindrical room with a very different gravity. He works his way around and discovers that there are other bodies and other flesh cases with varying degree of deterioration to them. He climbs up and finds spacesuits that look like the stereotypical gray men aliens we've all heard about before being startled by an actual little green man. He thinks he's finally escaped, but is pulled away by a few of them and placed on a table by two aliens that have almost human skin tone and extremities. They strip him and strap him to a table and cover him with a sheet that has almost saran wrap-like ability to wrap him to the table. He screams, but his head is covered by the same sheet and his mouth is filled with something that gags him before he's poked and prodded and a liquid put in his eye to kinda knock him out. The real Travis account is wildly different from what the filmmakers put together. Real-life Walton says that the light from the ship almost traveled through him before he passed out and woke up in a chair with a bright light above his head. He was surrounded by little gray aliens in orange suits, and while he hurt all over, he attempted to fight his way out of the room, using a tube as a bat to scare the aliens away. He then walked down a hallway that led to a planetarium-like room where he sat in a single chair and looked upon multiple stars and galaxies before moving a joystick-like contraption on the chair that would rotate his view of the ceiling. After he got up, he wandered down another hall and felt a presence behind him that ended up being another human who would not answer any of his questions. He had large gold eyes, a blue jumpsuit, and a glass helmet, and yet Travis still thought to trust him. They walked past a hangar of sorts and into a room with other humans before a gas mask was placed on Travis, and he blacked out again, only to awake in that phone booth. He would also later claim that he tried to take control of the craft and fly his way home. Movie Travis wakes up in an office, and then the film fast forwards to a few years later with Travis married to Mike's sister and having a small child and another on the way, while Mike has gone into seclusion after his own divorce. The two men make amends, and a scroll goes on the screen that says that Travis is still married and has 4 children, while also being the foreman in Snowflake where the events took place. It also says an additional polygraph was administered to Mike, Travis, and Dallas, where they all passed this time. The personal details of Travis's real life are hard to look up as he keeps much of it, well, personal. But the truth is he failed multiple tests before passing a few others. It was also said by some of the administrators that Travis knew how to cheat the test in order to make it look like he was telling the truth. While the book and Travis's story have been a major talking point for over 40 years, the movie is a cult classic and somewhat of a hidden gem. The movie differs quite a lot from Travis's account of what he claims happened to him during those 5 days, but most people that have read the book and seen the film seem to prefer the movie. Give both a chance if you're interested in the subject, and always remember to keep watching the skies.
This is the cup of my blood. The blood of the new and everlasting covenant, the mystery of faith.
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
The Exorcist took audiences by storm the day after Christmas in 1973, and then again in a re-release in the year 2000. All told, it would rake in a staggering $441 million at the box office, with much more coming on home video. In addition to the filmgoer excitement, it would ignite huge amounts of critical praise, culminating in the movie being nominated for a horror genre-defying 10 Academy Awards, including the coveted Best Picture. While it wouldn't win that elusive award, it was still the first horror film to be nominated in that category, and would still take home statues for Best Sound and Best Adapted Screenplay.
The winner is William Peter Blatty for The Exorcist.
Not a bad deal for novelist Blatty, who got to adapt his own work and win an Oscar in the process. Blatty based his novel and the characters within on a couple different things. First and foremost, the story itself was inspired by Blatty coming across the true account of an exorcism while he was a student at Georgetown University. His teacher went over a few of them, but focused heavily on the story of Roland Doe. The two main priests that performed the exorcism had kept diaries of all the events, and Blatty was able to pore over them to craft his story. Many of the events described in both diaries were put in the novel and later film by William Friedkin, but there were also quite a few changes, some in the name of storytelling, and some in the name of decency to the real-life person and their family. What are some of the changes, you ask? Well, let's start with the centerpiece in both mediums. Reagan McNeil in the Blatty version of the events was a 12-year-old girl who in the movie adaptation was played to stark reality by young actress Linda Blair. While it's true that both the dramatization and the real-life events surrounded the purported possession revolving around a child, the non-fiction version was a 14-year-old boy named Roland, which we found out later was a fake name given to cover his gruesome ordeal.
Frankly, it sounds made up.
A use of a Ouija board is important in both tales, but in the case of Roland, it's seen as the catalyst more than the fictional retelling, as here, it was his favorite aunt's death who sparked everything, and she's the one that taught him how to use the Ouija board. Another large part of Reagan's story is the fact that in terms of family, she only has her single-parent actress mother to take care of her, played in the movie by Ellen Burstyn. While she is obviously a caring and loving mother, she is also quite busy and there's no one else really to take care of Reagan other than her movie star and director friends. This is the first instance that Blatty decided to completely change the narrative, as young Roland was part of a rather large family that lived in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Later on in the narrative, the entire family moved to St. Louis to be with the remainder of their family after what they saw as a sign to go there to fix their son. While both stories start in DC, the movie keeps the entire plot in the area around Georgetown, partly because that's where Blatty went to school, and partly to keep the characters and plot more concise. Reagan starts acting strangely, including unexplainable things happening in and around the house. She is then subject to a litany of medical tests where the doctors can find nothing wrong with her. Things get worse until one night her mother's friend who was there to babysit is found dead outside the house. We later learn in a conversation between Father Karras and the detective that the guy's head was turned completely around. Some of these strange occurrences are ripped straight from the two diaries, with strange scratching noises and leaking water, and especially Ronald, who many believe to be the real name of the boy in question, having his bed move all by itself. Ronald was also subjected to physical, mental, and even religious evaluations with no results. Where the true story breaks off is that Ronald never killed anyone while possessed. This is purely a plot point for dramatic effect.
I didn't kill anybody.
Reagan gets worse still, and the detective in charge of the death of her mother's friend, Kinderman, who here is played by Lee Cobb, reaches out to a mutual friend named Karras. Obviously, the Kinderman character is also a creation for the book and film, as there weren't any reported police activity surrounding the original exorcism. Karras is a priest struggling with his faith, but agrees to see the girl as it was recommended that an exorcism may be due, even just for emotional effect. Karras, played in a career-defining performance by Jason Miller, goes to the McNeil residence to see for himself. Father Karras speaks with Regan and even tests her with things like fake holy water, which she does react to, and gets the famous green pea soup spit up onto his face before seeing the words "help me" scratched into her skin from an unseen force. While not wholly convinced, he decides that it's time to request an exorcism. The book and movie decide to invent way more gruesome details surrounding what the possession did to its host. There was never an example of Ronald's head turning completely around, he never projectile vomited green soup over any of the people that were trying to help, and there was never any record of anything like the infamous crucifix masturbation scene. While Ronald's exorcism was eventually handled by 2 priests, there was a prior attempt at exorcism done by Father E. Albert Hughes, who was the local Catholic priest for the family. He did see writing appear on the boy out of nowhere, but instead of "help me," it spelled out "Louis," which the family took as a sign to go to St. Louis, where they had even more family and help available to them. Blatty left all of this out, both to keep the plot in Georgetown and also not to add an extra character. The first exorcism overall was disrupted and stopped abruptly when Ronald broke part of his bed off and injured Father Hughes. Father Karras does get permission to perform the exorcism, but there's a caveat attached to it. He needs to have an experienced priest with him to help, one that has performed an exorcism before. This is where the film finally gets its holy pairing of Karras and Father Merrin, portrayed by the late, more than great Max von Sydow, who had to have old age makeup applied to better fit the character. The 2 men prepare for the exorcism, and Merrin warns that they will be assaulted both emotionally and physically by the demon within Regan, and they begin their task. The demon Pazuzu inside the girl uses Karras' lack of faith and reeling guilt towards his mother's death to make him weak. When Merrin sees his weakness, he tells Karras to rest, and unfortunately this is his downfall. Father Karras promises the girl's mother that her daughter will not die under his watch, and when he goes back in to see, he is now alone. Father Merrin has died from the stress. Karras verbally and physically attacks Regan until he tricks the demon into inhabiting his body, where he selflessly and heroically throws himself out the window to his death. While this version of the events is certainly exciting and perfect for a work of fiction like a book or a movie, it's almost completely made up. When Ronald's family got to St. Louis, they were put into contact with 2 priests from St. Louis University staff. Father Walter Halloran and Reverend William Bodern agreed to perform the exorcism on young Ronald, but, unlike the movie, they would use multiple assistants and later move the boy from his home to a hospital bed. Many of the strange occurrences, the violent outbursts, weird movements, bed shaking, that had happened the first go-around would also be present for the 2 Jesuit priests. However, the violence of the movie and the overtly strange occurrences were completely made up. While the film presented several terrifying acts of rebellion for the demon that was taking hold of Regan, like the aforementioned vomiting, head-turning, and sacrilege, there were many things that were found within the 2 diaries that Blatty simply left out. Both priests claimed that they saw on multiple occasions a red X appear on Ronald's chest in the same manner that the word Louis did earlier. At first, they just assumed it was the beginning of a new word to come, but then came to the conclusion that it represented the Roman numeral for 10, and that in turn meant that there were actually 10 demons cursing the poor child. Another big difference between the 2 stories is that the actual exorcism of Ronald Doe took place over quite a long time, especially compared to that of what we see on the film. The 2 priests worked day and night until the family finally had their son put in a hospital for the remainder of the ordeal. The day after Easter in 1949, after the placing of several holy artifacts on Ronald, he awoke and was free of his possession. Both priests had made it out alive. As you can see, the main story differs pretty wildly from the real-life events, but how about the characters? Well, we already went over some of the differences between Regan and her real-life counterpart, including the gender swap and age change, but how about their fates? The character of Regan would have to go on to deal with the events of The Exorcist 2, which is a fate arguably worse than the tragedy she suffered during the first film. Ronald Hunkeler, who we believe to be the identity of the boy in question, would go on to a pretty amazing life. He passed of a stroke in 2020, but not before putting an entire career into NASA, even helping with the Apollo moon landing. He would of course keep everything very close to the chest, as he wouldn't want to be a distraction or concern for those close to him or his coworkers. While both movie and book priests perish in their pursuit of healing the young McNeil girl, the real-life Jesuit priests would go on to live full lives. William Bodern would stay with the church his entire life and pass away in 1983, while Walter Halloran would make it all the way until 2005, becoming the last member of the team that performed the exorcism to die. Nearly everything we know from the events are thanks to both men keeping detailed diaries that Blatty would later get his hands on. Without these, we may never have had the best-selling novel or fan-favorite film. While Merrin was in Iraq on an archaeological dig and had performed an exorcism before, and Father Karras had doubts in his faith and guilt over the passing of his mother, neither of the true-life priests had anything so showy going on. These were simply plot and character points to add extra dimensions to heroic, but ultimately ordinary men. While the book and movie versions are very close in overall plot and characters, they do have differences in execution and nuances within each other, even with author William Peter Blatty being the one to write the script. While not on the level of Ed Gein being merely an inspiration for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but otherwise having nothing to do with it, the events that took place in 1949 as the basis for The Exorcist are very different to what we read in the book or see in the movie. While the true-life events are undeniably harrowing, the flair and character pieces that could only be added by a writer and in the way which Friedkin put together the movie make for a very exciting and worthwhile experience. When we think of zombies, it's only natural to go first right into everyone's favorite flesh-eating ghouls that were popularized by George Romero in his genre classic Night of the Living Dead. But the idea of zombies has been around much longer and is actually steeped in fact. Haitian voodoo has claimed to create zombies for hundreds of years, and in film, these were represented in some of our earliest horror movies. White Zombie and I Walked with a Zombie are two of the more famous ones, but the entire subgenre has some fascinating watches. Horror legend Wes Craven brought a return to voodoo zombies in 1988's The Serpent and the Rainbow, but did you know this story is based on true events? Don't let them bury you as we find out what the fuck really happened to this horror movie. In 1985, a book called The Serpent and the Rainbow, a Harvard scientist's astonishing journey into the secret societies of Haitian voodoo, zombies, and magic, that's a mouthful, was published by Simon & Schuster based on the journey of anthropologist Wade Davis. The book was popular, but also criticized for inaccuracies. What could have been a purely scientific study was turned into a non-fiction narrative almost. The book leans heavily on not only the journey that Davis went through, but also the very history of voodoo zombies in the country he visits. 3 years later, the film adaptation would come out with The Serpent and the Rainbow that was released on February 5th, and would make $19 million on its $7 million budget. The movie was directed by horror legend Wes Craven. After watching this for the first time in about 20 years, I'd forgotten how different it is compared to his other horror movies. It's not music of the heart levels of non-horror, but it's much more of an investigative political thriller with some awesomely scary scenes thrown in. The movie is, of course, based on the book by Davis, but the screenplay was written by Richard Maxwell and Adam Rodman. Maxwell only had 2 other movies to his name, with The Challenge, starring Scott Glenn and Toshiro Mifune, from 1982, and Shadow of a Ninja from 1989. Rodman has even less under his belt, with only a handful of TV movies and episodes before and after this. They both did a great job with the material, even if they made it a much more exciting and supernatural adventure. The movie's directed by Wes Craven, who's almost certainly best known for the TV movies Chiller from 1985 and Night Visions from 1990. Yep, nothing else to look at. Look, I get bored talking about the same A+ movies from these guys, okay? Oh, also check out Invitation to Hell. The cast is also a fun and eclectic group led by everyone's favorite president, Bill Pullman. Pullman plays the stand-in for Davis named Dennis Allen. It feels like Pullman has been around forever, but that's just due to his roles being iconic. He actually had his first on-screen appearance in the TV show Cagney and Lacey before quickly becoming Lone Star in Spaceballs. In addition to being a war hero president in Independence Day, he showed up in other horror fare like Braindead and Lake Placid. The supporting cast features Kathy Tyson as the Doctor Contact, Academy Award nominee Paul Winfield as the Nice Voodoo Priest, and Zake Smoke as the evil doctor and political enforcer. Really hope I got that name right. The movie opens with the ever-popular "This movie was inspired by a true story" text, as well as a cool and chilling little preamble. In the legends of voodoo, the serpent is the symbol of the earth. The rainbow is the symbol of heaven. Between the two, all creatures must live and die. But because he has a soul, man can be trapped in a terrible place where death is only the beginning. We then see a body being stolen by a group of armed men straight out of a funeral, followed by another man being pronounced dead and buried before tears roll down his face. We then get introduced to Bill Pullman's character of Alan Dennis, who has landed in the Amazon and speaks with a shaman before drinking a potion and getting lost in the forest. His pilot has died, but the jaguar spirit he became friends with leads him to safety. Alan Dennis is the stand-in for the real-life Wade Davis, and moving past the first scene for a moment, Davis really was lost in the jungles of Colombia. But he wasn't alone after his pilot friend was killed, nor did he meet a shaman priest that gave him a hallucinogen and had him play with a jaguar. Out of his group of fellow travelers, he was the only one who saw it and claims it led him the right way to civilization, just like the one in the movie. The first part is a table setter to multiple cases of zombieism that Davis alludes to in many of the historical chapters of his book to better paint the picture of his real-life journey. Sometime after Dennis makes it home, he's called in to speak to a member of a pharmaceutical company and a professor to see if he will go to Haiti to investigate a possible drug that makes zombies. They want to use its possible effects for anesthetic purposes and show him the case of Christophe, who was a man that apparently died and was buried before coming back 7 years later. He agrees to go with funding and a reward to research both the man and the medicine. When he gets there, he meets Dr. Duchamp, who is in charge of the patients and has a very real experience in possession and voodoo. The two go to a local nightclub owner and kind priest Lucien Celine, who is willing to help them but warns of the local police who are led by an evil man. Alan and Dr. Duchamp find Christophe in a graveyard and talk to him about his death. This section's really close to what actually happened. Wade Davis was approached by a pharmaceutical company to go investigate the theoretical drug that could help patients and doctors with surgeries and other procedures. The tale of Christophe is actually based on the real case of Clavius Narcisse, who was pronounced dead in 1962, but 18 years later found by his sister and told her he was brought back to work as a slave. The movie changes more names as well as a few of the important aspects of the characters Alan meets. Instead of the tough eventual love interest of Dr. Duchamp, the real doctor was Lamar Duyan. Max Bouvier was turned into Lucien, and his daughter Rachel becomes a companion to Wade, though there was no romance between them, merely respect for each other's curiosity about what's going on. The two did also speak to Narcisse, who is what Christophe was based off of. The movie moves on to Alan coming back to his hotel, only to find it ransacked and bloody with an assailant still inside. He and Marielle Duchamp go see the man who can allegedly make the zombie powder named Mozart. Mozart has a whole party atmosphere with cockfighting, a bar, and plenty of people to enjoy. He presents a goat that he will give the powder to, and Alan secretly marks its hoof with a knife to track it before watching it die. They leave and go to a ceremony where Dennis has an awful dream with Christophe and an unknown zombie who shoots a snake out of its mouth in one of the movie's best scares. Dennis and Muriel make love, and on the way home, Dennis is taken in by the police who warn him to stop his investigation. Lots of screaming in the background suggest a warning, and some really good political dialogue too. Well, there's quite a bit of divergence here, mostly to create a movie plot. Instead of the villainous Petrade, the real version of this was far less nefarious, Lamarck Duyan. He was mostly another scientist who was attempting to find the proper use for the formula, and is the one who found the case of Narcisse. He also warned Davis that it was attempted murder in Haiti to use the potion on a person. Mozart was based off another man named Marcel Pierre, who would actually get famous from the BBC for explaining the zombie potion, something the movie calls back to later on. Rachel was just 16 when Davis met her, and as I said earlier, there was no romance between the two. She was the daughter of Max Bouvier, but she did have a history of ritual possession. Muriel and Dennis go back to Mozart the next day, and he tries to sell them on a different goat from the one they saw die. Alan tricks Mozart while also calling him a fool, and seems to drink the zombie poison, but by sleight of hand has switched it to something completely harmless. Mozart, impressed, agrees to give him the real ingredients, but says Dennis must help him with the entire process. The police take Dennis again, but this time there is no warning, and they drive a nail into his scrotum. Muriel takes him to nurse back to health, and they stay in the jungle while continuing to make the powder. The police now frame him for murder and force him to leave rather than go to prison. Mozart meets him on the plane and gives him the powder in exchange for fame, and his watch. In a cool case of art imitating life, Wade Davis pulled similar trickery in a badass move to impress Pierre, who also tried to give Davis fake powder. He agreed to show him the real stuff, but, just like the movie shows, wanted Davis to help. Many of the ingredients in the film were also the real ones used in the actual powder, especially tetrodotoxin, another one I hope I said right, which is one of the most powerful on the planet. Instead of an old woman's skull, the real-life recipe called for the skull of a recently deceased infant. Yikes. On the other side of the truth coin, since Davis was never assaulted or taken by police, the infamous nail through the scrotum scene was complete fiction, as was Alan being framed for murder. Things I'm sure Wade Davis is quite happy about. Back home, Dennis looks over all the ingredients and they run tests on animals while also figuring out possible applications for the drug. Dennis continues to have nightmares and be plagued by what he left behind, and at a dinner to celebrate, the wife of the pharmaceutical rep is possessed and attempts to hurt the people at the party. Dennis flies back to Haiti and must evade capture while Mozart is killed and Muriel is taken to be sacrificed. Lucien tries to protect Alan but is killed while Alan is sprayed with the powder. He's pronounced dead and buried alive, only to be rescued by Christophe. Slowly recovering, he goes to save Muriel while the country's leader flees with a revolution beginning. Alan uses that chaos to sneak in and get past a zombified Lucien and other spirits to confront Petrod. He and Muriel destroy all the soul canisters, which weakens their enemy, before he and Alan have one final face-off in his mind, something Lucien warned him about. Wade left Haiti under far less harrowing circumstances, but he did head back home to Harvard to study the concoction. He also traveled back to the country, but again, not because of cross-global possession or because his love interest was in danger. Obviously, everything with Petrod was fabricated, as the man wasn't real either. When he returned to Haiti, a man named Gerard Simon was the one to help he and Rachel make the most complete jar of zombie potion and to understand it better. A good chunk of the book is actually a great history lesson on the region and the beginnings of zombie culture. The movie tells a fun story based on the adventures of Wade Davis, but obviously goes much further into an exciting and even more supernatural feel. The book is easy and a great read, even if Davis faced criticism from the scientific community. Fact doesn't quite match fiction here, but there are a lot of things that were taken close to verbatim. Watch the Shudder episode of Cursed Films Season 2 on the making of the movie, rewatch the film on Scream Factory's amazing Blu-ray, and then discover for yourself how much of it was real by checking out the book.